Well, you found me. This is the Vintage Woodshop. I'm Sandy, and as I like to say, welcome to my playpen.
Hey guys, thanks for stopping by. As you can see, I got this big old chunk of cherry mounted up here on the lathe. This is a piece of cherry that I harvested on November in 2020. And I'm not quite sure it's real dry yet. Once I open this up, I'm pretty sure I'm going to find a little damp down in there. But the damp is not the big problem I've got. I've been working on it, and the more I worked on it, I finally decided I'd let you guys see what I was doing with it. So what I have been doing with it is knocking the bark off. If you leave the bark on there, it's going to have soft spots. When you start sanding, the bark is going to sand quicker than everything around it, and you'll have little dips in it. So, got to get rid of the bark. And that's not the biggest problem. The big problem is this. Let me give you a better view. This thing is about almost 10 inches in diameter. At its highest point, it's about 7 inches tall. But here's the big problem. That crack. As you can see, that crack goes all the way across. It goes all the way across. It goes all the way across back here. We've got the same thing here. Listen to this. This side's nice and solid. This side sounds pretty hollow. I'm kind of afraid to spin this thing because I don't know how much wood there's holding it together. So what I'm going to do is clean this thing up, get it ready to get stuck in the pressure pot with some resin to hold all this stuff together, and then I'm going to turn a nice big deep bowl with it. This used to be red before I let it set in some lacquer thinner to clean all the crud off of it, but this thing works astonishingly well. It is a power carving disc that's called the Holy Galahad or something like that. It's the same company that puts out those discs with the chainsaw chains on them. I bought one, it scared me to death, and I threw it away. But this thing works magnificently. I'll rev it up and show you guys a close-up of how cool it is because you can watch the work through the holes. So here we go.
I did get this all cleaned up. And in the finished product, it was kind of interesting because I didn't go back and smooth out the surface with anything other than that coarse disc. So it left some kind of cool markings in it.
Always amazes me how heavy this cherry is. See how bad that crack is. All the way around the edge, all the way around here. And of course, the reason for that is, look what there. I'm not supposed to leave the pith in there. Be back in a minute.
As I'm making the mold for this blank, you look at the edges I left there and it was way too much. I used a gallon of resin on this thing, and it seems like probably half of it ended up in ribbons all over my front, as you will see in just a minute or two. The reason you're not hearing any sound is because this video editor of mine gets rid of the sound when you get it up to high speed. This project has gone on forever. When I got done, I had a little over 12 hours of video, so you're seeing most of the video that I shot, but you're seeing it at 40 times the speed at which it was recorded.
I've had this Easy Wood tool forever. I cannot remember how far back I bought this. I think I've had it 10, 12 years, right after they came out. This is the second cutter I've had on this, and the only reason I replaced it was because I stripped the head out of the screw, and it was easier to buy a new screw and a cutter than to find a new screw. At any rate, Rockler made life a whole lot easier when they came out with this. It's a way cool little magnetic thing that holds every size of carbide cutter that I'm familiar with, just like that, magnetically. And it's got this magic little bar that is supposed to make it easy to sharpen these. But I've got a way better deal. Watch this. Why use that little thing when you've got one of those? I've had that thing longer than I've had that Easy tool. I've sharpened every chisel I own with it. I don't know how many times. That thing is worth its weight in gold. And watch this. All nice and sharp. And the reason that I went all the way around the disc like that was to make sure it got sharpened from all angles. Now it's just a matter of putting it back on the tool and going back to work. It's magnetic, so this holds on. This is magnetic, so it sticks to any metal surface you put it on. Thank you, Rockler.
These are the ubiquitous shots that are supposed to be displayed in slow motion. And don't worry, as those ribbons build up on my face mask, there's always a little hole in them that I can see through and still see what I'm doing. Here I'm turning down that piece of pine that I used as the base for the casting, and ultimately learned, should have known better originally, that you don't use softwood for tenon material. It's going to turn out to be a problem in just a few minutes. When I go to core this, that tenon is going to crack. So, lesson learned, hardwood for tenons. Here I'm setting up to do the coring. That's the one-way coring system, the number 3 knife. And I have difficulty doing the coring on this one. You just saw me using my Easy Wood detailer to cut a slot there. In doing so, I wanted to get the slot deep enough so I could get the knife in there far enough so I could support it with the live center on the tailstock. From this point on, that piece of wood fought me. When I stopped, you can see how deep that crack went, but the grain was so figured and that wood is so hard, I couldn't use a bowl gouge on it because of the resin. I was using the Easy Wood detailer, and there's enough junk in that piece of cherry. I kept switching tools, it kept grabbing, and ultimately I ended up not being able to go as deeply into that bowl as I had originally intended. It was at this point that I decided I couldn't go any deeper, so my design changed. I decided that since I couldn't go any deeper and there was so much left over, I'll cut the bottom off this bowl and use it as a cover. So I remounted the bowl on that little stub I had sticking up from the bottom on the woodworm screw, flattened off the bottom, cut a new tenon. Yes, I used some hardwood I had, and carried on with the completion of the bowl. Looking back on it, this is one of the most complex turning projects I've ever done. And in looking at this video, I determined that I used every one of the chucks that I own.
Good morning. I've lost track of what day this is. It's either day 3 or day 4. This piece of wood has really kicked my wazoo around this shop. Let me give you guys a closer view of this and see some of the wonderful things that have been happening here. Wasn't too long ago in this video, all of this stuff was one piece. You all remember when this piece was sitting right about there. And I cored that puppy out. I can remember telling you that when I was looking at this, I was a little leery on spinning this piece of wood because of this crack. And then after I poured the resin in there, where did all my resin go? Well, check this out. Where did all my resin go? Look how big that crack is and how deep it is. It goes all the way through to the bottom. You recall that this is the bottom that I cut off on the bandsaw. Look how wide that crack was down there, and look down in here and see there wasn't anything holding that piece of wood together. If I'd spun that piece of wood, it would have come apart. So that was a piece of judicious thinking on my part. Where do I go from here? Okay, this piece of wood is going to get turned and become the pedestal. This piece of wood, as you can see right here, is going to get a recess, and it is going to become a cover. If things work out, and of course, changes are made subject without notice. Back to it, my friends.
From this point on, the bulk of the video that I deleted was exactly this: stopping the lathe, filling a void with CA, and hitting it with activator and turning it off. That went on a lot. All of the sanding that I did is the typical sanding. I went from 80 up through 400, knocked the nibs down with a white 3M cloth, wiped it off with stove fuel, because you can't buy denatured alcohol in California anymore, and then finished it off with axe paste and the polishing compound that they sell with the axe. I did end up using all my chucks. They're the cold jaws, and I ended up mounting that thing with my vacuum chuck in order to turn that tenon down. I think that's the chunk of bobinga. Been laying around the shop forever, has a big flaw in it, so I went and turned it down a little bit and threw it in the pressure pot with some resin, and that is going to be the fourth and final piece of this construction I'm building. This will be a finial that will act as the handle on the lid for my bowl. Time to put this thing to bed. So, it must be time for the beauty shots. Remember back when I was telling you about that power planer and how I didn't use any sandpaper afterwards? This is the effect it left behind on the lid, but it's kind of cool. It looks like feathering. And you remember that big chunk of wood that I shoved into the molding when I was getting ready to cast this? Well, that's what left of that big piece of wood, and as you can see, a whole bunch of resin ended up on the shop floor with it. But it turned out kind of pretty around it too, so I'm not feeling too badly about it. And with that, we'll do 45 seconds of video. Obligatory little requests. If you haven't subscribed, please do. Turn on the notifications. Share the wealth if you'd care to. Those who have subscribed, all 6 or 7 of you, thank you. I appreciate the vote of confidence. Until next time, get out to the shop, strap on that tool belt, and get into that piece of wood to discover the beauty that Mother Nature left in there for you.